Welcome to Education Forum. I'm Herman Badillo, Vice Chairman of the Board of Trustees of the City University. The improvement of education affects all New Yorkers. This program will focus on the key educational issues and challenges before us all. My guest today is Randi Weingarten, who is President of the United Federation of Teachers, representing more than 130,000 active and retired non-supervisory educators in New York City public school system. She has an unusual background because she got a BS degree in industrial and labor relations from Cornell, and she graduated from Benjamin Cardozo Law School, so she's a lawyer, but she also has been a teacher at Clara Barton High School, and she was the general counsel of the UFT when Sandy Feldman left and Randi became the president. Now, every day we read about problems in the school system, so I'm going to ask you, what's the biggest problem that you have in the system today, and what are you doing about it?
The biggest problem is actually a long-term problem, not a short-term, moment-to-moment problem. The biggest problem right now is how we create a movement to rebuild our teaching force, because we need to make sure that every single child gets a decent education and is prepared for whatever he or she wants to do when he or she graduates from college.
Now, what's the
way to do it
with the teaching force? Because one of the things that we've been reading about is that there's a shortage of teachers in New York City, because not just because of the teacher education problems, but because teachers come into New York City, get some experience, and they move to the suburbs because they make more money.
Right. Well, let me give you the statistics, and you'll see what I mean by this. Right now, as we speak, we have 72,000 teachers that work in New York City schools, 10,000 of whom do not have all of their requirements for licensure under state standards. 55, aside from that, 55% of our new teachers within the first 5 years leave to go to either the private sector or to jobs in the suburbs. And on top of all of that, of those 72,000 teachers, right now as we speak, 17,000 could leave and retire today if they so chose. So what I'm talking about when I say a long-term problem is, if unless we make sure we deal with this shortage issue and make sure that the salaries are competitive enough that we attract and retain people into teaching to teach to these higher academic standards, we will not have a school system in 5 or 6 years. The Board of Ed itself thinks it needs 30 to 40,000 teachers in the next 5 or 6 years. That's the biggest crisis we have.
So is the biggest problem the question of increasing salaries or getting more qualified teachers out of the colleges?
The only way we will have a good labor pool of people, not only from the colleges, but kids who want to be teachers, is to increase the salaries. I see them as part and parcel of the same issue. Because if you need 30 to 40,000 new teachers over the course of the next 5 years, if the United States of America needs 2.2 million teachers over the course of the next 10 years, then we have to, both nationally as well as locally, make teaching the profession that kids want to go into.
Okay, but the discrepancy now between the salaries in the New York City public school system and Nassau, Suffolk, and Westchester is huge. Do the salaries have to be increased to be exactly comparable, or could it be to a lower amount?
The salaries have to be competitive enough. You're talking to the union leader.
No, I mean, that's what I'm asking.
saying I think the
Okay.
salaries should be higher
All right, let me
than
put
the
it this way.
salaries in the suburbs.
To meet
they
what
need
you
to be higher.
Okay, to meet what you call the long-range problem, how much of an increase would there have to be in total amount?
There should be, in the next 2 or 3 years, there should be at least a 25% increase.
Which amounts to
In
how much?
my estimation, it amounts to a lot of money, but ultimately, if education,
No, but how much? How many billions?
it's each percentage point is about $40 million. So one could do the math themselves. I don't really actually. My point is this: ultimately, the way in which education is improved in any sector, not that we shouldn't do mandatory summer school, not that we shouldn't have our get tough policies, but ultimately it is the human capital. In any business person knows this. If you don't have a qualified professional in every single classroom, then we're not going to reach every single child. And that's what requires a lot of work, time, and effort. And it will require both a chancellor and a mayor to say, this is really a priority.
Okay, but let's say that I'm the mayor and I'm your friend, and I say to you, I agree with you that we have to increase salaries, but the problem is that teachers are only part of the entire labor force in the city. There are policemen, firemen, sanitation workers, all others. How can I increase the salaries to a large extent as you propose without having a huge increase for all the other civil servants?
Well, now you're asking me to wear both my hats as the head of the MLC, the Municipal Labor Coalition, as well as the head of the teachers union. I believe that all workers should work hard and should get some kind of cost of living increase. But this right now is a crisis. And ultimately, if right now we have thousands of people who are uncertified, and ultimately 17,000 of our most qualified people can retire at any moment. If we don't do this, separate and apart from the rest of the labor policy, we will be doing a grave injustice to our kids. So between the competitive labor market that we live in, as well as the shortage, this is a very important thing to do, regardless of the rest of the labor policy.
So one of the things you would say is you don't find other civil servants moving to Nassau and Suffolk and Westchester as you do with teachers.
Well, I mean, the police officers, the police have a similar problem, although they do not have the same kind of shortage. But ultimately, I believe that every single unit has to be looked at differently dependent upon what's going on. And in education, if we don't have qualified teachers, we're not going to be able to make sure that we can provide every student with the higher standards we've all talked about. You can't end social promotion, really truly end social promotion, if you don't make sure that you have a qualified professional in every single classroom to teach to the higher standards. Even if you're lower class size, which is absolutely important, you need to make sure that you have the qualified professional.
Okay, now you're talking about qualified teachers, which is the problem that I have with my hat as vice chairman of the Board of Trustees of the City University, because I'm sure that you know that in many of the city colleges, we have a situation where teachers have been getting a diploma in education, but yet they cannot pass the teacher's exam. And it's a huge problem. For example, at City College, 77% of all the Hispanic students who get a degree in education can't pass the teacher's exam. And we have been mandated by the Board of Regents to correct that before the end of this year. Otherwise, City College would be disqualified for teacher education. Decertified. So what's the reason for all this?
Well, I don't know what's going on at City College probably as much as you know.
Or at York College or Medgar Evers.
But ultimately, I do know that the standards for becoming an entry-level teacher are being raised. And I do know that the newer tests have a different kind of pass-failure rate than the older tests. And the newer tests, there is more and more Hispanic and African American young people who are taking them and passing them, and that's good because we need more and more Hispanic and African American teachers in our schools. The real issue becomes this, ultimately. We need to make sure that kids who get a college and a high school education, that means something. That high school diploma needs to mean something, the college diploma needs to mean something, and there needs to be whatever supports we need to put in order to play catch-up we need to do, but ultimately the diplomas need to mean something.
Okay, but there's also a movement away from the whole concept of teacher education. Diane Ravitch was on this program, and she said, and President Clinton has said, that they think that maybe instead of teachers getting a diploma in education, they should be getting a diploma in whatever area they want to teach. For example, you teach history or social studies, that is what you should get a degree on rather than in education. What is your view about that?
Well, I disagree. I think the teacher colleges need to be better and need to teach pedagogy better, and there needs to be much more of a push in the teachers' colleges, or at least much more focus on what actually goes on day to day in classrooms, in public schools. But where I think Diane Ravitch and I agree, and we've had a lot of conversations about this, is that teachers need two areas of expertise. They need their content knowledge, and they need a knowledge of pedagogy. And what happens is that you have one sometimes to the expense of the other. What Diane talks about all the time is that people don't have the content knowledge. If I teach social studies, I need to be very well versed in social studies. I need to be well versed in history. A math teacher, Alan Hevesy, the controller—
shouldn't that be a requirement?
That should be a requirement. So there should be, what I'm saying is there should be two requirements. And teaching as a profession, if you need both the content requirement and the pedagogy requirement, the how to teach requirement, it should then be valued more than a law degree or a medical degree. Historically, what has happened is that women who used to go into teaching in droves now have tremendous opportunities. And we don't have people going into teaching in the same way that they used to. Yet teaching, the art and the profession of teaching, is just as rigorous as the art and the profession of accounting, of law, and of medicine. But we are the only profession, and I've now had both teaching profession and legal profession. The teaching profession is the only profession where people believe you can be a teacher without really going through all the professional training that other professions demand. And that's wrong, and that's what we're seeing. In New York City, for example, as I said before, if you have 10,000 people who don't have all of their credentials, a lot of these folks are going to be terrific teachers, but it is totally unfair to both them as well as to the kids to expect the same expectations from them before they have all of their credentials as after.
So do they have to go back to schools?
Yes. Many of the teachers in the city are doing a tremendous amount of learning as we speak. We have, for example, the UFT, the union, runs a venerable university ourselves right now. Last year alone, 22,000 of our active members, so 22,000 of the 72,000 teachers, took some kind of course from us to learn how to be a better teacher, and hundreds of thousands of folks walk through our doors to take a workshop or something about learning how to be a better teacher. We spend a lot of time helping teachers become better teachers. The Regents has said that as of the year 2003, they will not allow any more uncertified teachers. So aside from everything else that we're talking about, how are we going to make sure we attract enough people who have their baseline requirements into our city schools unless we pay them? And how are we going to make sure that those 17,000 folks who have said to me, many of them have said to me in school meetings, I'm leaving, I can't do this anymore. How do we retain them?
Do you think you're going to make it by the year 2003?
Well, the only way we will is if there is an effort between the chancellor and the mayor to do something about the salary structure so that we can attract and retain people into teaching in New York City.
We'll be back after this announcement.
Do you think you have the power to change the world?
I can change the world one child at a time.
I know I can make a difference in those children's lives.
I teach.
I teach.
Yes, they're teachers, but to the kids they reach, they're heroes.
I teach.
Do you have the power to wake up young minds, to be someone's hero? Teach, to make an impact on our future. Call 1-800-45-TEACH. Be a teacher, be a hero.
We're back with Randi Weingarten, the president of the United Federation of Teachers. Let's assume that somehow, by some miracle, which I cannot foresee, we're able to work out the problem of getting the qualified teachers by the year 2003.
Or 2001.
Or, well, 2001 would be a really remarkable miracle.
Well, I want to enlist your help, Herman.
No, I'm willing to help, but I'm part of the struggle, and we're struggling with it at the City University, because here we have a deadline of the end of this year.
Right, absolutely.
And I don't know, when I've talked to some of the college presidents, it's going to be very difficult to meet the requirement of getting up to 85% of the teachers passing the teacher's exam. So it will be very tough. But assuming that we're able to get the qualified teachers, will we be able to deal with the standards that are being set up for students by the Board of Regents now? For example, what happens now when we get the result of the test this April and we find a large number of students who may have failed?
Right, the fourth grade reading test.
Fourth grade Regents. Fourth grade reading test.
What, you know, what the standards are about, and I get concerned about this too, because the moment you set a bar, what happens is people magically think every child is going to be able to get above that bar. And that would be a real mistake if people look at that and say, okay, you have failed because you can't magically get everyone above that bar. We have done something that is very, very risky in both New York State and New York City. All of us, all the people that are involved in education and care about education, say it's very important to set high standards and high expectations. But as Diane Ravitch and others have said, the supports to get us there and to get children there are not in place.
Okay, but it's done.
So
you see,
ultimately,
the tests have been given, and now the results will come out, and there's going to be summer sessions, for example.
So what will happen, and what needs to happen, is at the same time as the standards have been set, we need to make sure that parents know what it's about, and it is not indicia of either failure or passage. It is an indicia of getting to the highest possible standard. The second thing we need to do, and I credit the Chancellor for doing this, is to have supports in place, like mandatory summer school and other kinds of remedial and enrichment supports in place to do that. But the third thing is that we have to work on ensuring that the tools for getting there, like smaller class sizes right now, like making sure that schools have well-qualified teachers, like making sure that professional development opportunities are there to help teachers learn about the standards, are in place right now. And that all takes a tremendous amount of targeted funds. The worst thing we could do is to create the standard, create the expectation, and do nothing to help both our students and staff get there.
But then we've done the worst thing, because we're now in the spring of 1999. There's no additional monies in the budget, right? And we've given the test, and we're now talking about this summer giving a huge number of students summer sessions. First of all, are the teachers going to be available for the summer sessions?
Well, in the past, we've had teachers available for the summer sessions, and we make sure that we alert people that there's summer work available. There does need to be, I think, a little bit more of an inducement to work in the summer.
Because there's no air conditioning.
There's no air conditioning, and I saw several of the summer programs last summer. And whereas I thought that many of the early grade programs were absolutely terrific, although when you went up to, if you were in an elementary school and you went up to the second and third floor, it was stiflingly hot. Yep. The high school programs were lacking, particularly since in the high school programs, you had class sizes of 50, 55, 60 children, which is very bad. You cannot teach a class of 50, 60 children. I had a very hard time teaching classes of 34 children. You can't reach all children when you teach 34 children, even though that is the class size
Well, my
in New
wife
York
has
City.
37 kids in her classes in junior high school, and every day she deals with 150 kids.
Right.
That's an enormous burden.
It's an
for anyone.
enormous load. And if you are a social studies or an English or a math or a science teacher or a foreign language teacher or even a music teacher, an art teacher, a phys ed teacher, when you have a kind of roster of children that numbers 150, 180, 200, you don't get to know those children with the same kind of intimacy that if you had 100. And ultimately, that becomes very important to make sure that kids don't fall under the cracks. And so what I have said to the Chancellor, that I think we should work on some of the conditions around summer school to make it more conducive, both to attract teachers into teaching for summer school, as well as making the learning conditions more conducive. But ultimately, if I had my druthers, we would be doing the assessments after we had the conditions in place to get the standards rolling.
Yeah,
but not my decision. Ultimately, though, it's still important to have higher standards and to say to parents that we want to make sure that all children read by 3rd grade. We want to make sure that all children get a diploma that's meaningful, but at the same time, we need people from the governor to the mayor to the chancellor to the legislature to say, okay, the educators are willing to do this. Now we're going to support them by targeting funds to make the conditions possible to do it.
Okay, now here's the problem as it stands now.
Absolutely.
There's a report that was issued last year
By the
from the
PA.
Public Education Association that points out that only 48% of the students graduate within 4 years from the public school system. That's a disastrous figure. And then there's another report that was issued by the Public Agenda that says that there's a survey taken of employers in the city, and they said that 86% of them found that the students who had a high school diploma really were not up to doing high school work. So that means that we have a serious problem of standards.
Well, you know, the problem is, I think we have an issue with standards, and I am very pleased that we have now articulated high standards, and the powers that be in the city have now said, let's end social promotion. But at the same time,
Yeah, but when?
but at the same time, I don't want to give our kids short shrift. In our high school system, for example, right now, over 50% of the children that go to our high schools in the city of New York don't start in our K-8 system. The mobility in the city is tremendous. The poverty in the city is still tremendous.
Well, they come from Latin America, they come from Asia, they come from
There's been an increase in poverty
Europe?
in the city. There's been an increase in some of the obstacles that kids feel. And what I don't want to do is I don't want to consign kids to a sense that they're not going to make it to these standards. I know we need the supports, I know the teachers need the supports, but there's a whole lot of schools in the city and a whole lot of kids in the city that have been served incredibly well by the school system. That number, 48%, is absolutely right for 4 years, but the number goes up to as high as 80% after 6 and 7 years. Doesn't mean it's right. I would like to see kids graduate after 4 years. I would like to see kids graduate to the highest standards. I think it's going to be a struggle to get there, but I don't want to consign our kids. I don't want to label our kids in that kind of way. Our kids are terrific kids in the city, and I think with the right supports, we're going to be able to get every single child reading at 3rd grade and get every single child who wants a high school diploma to those kind of standards.
Okay, but because of the failures of the, or the perceived failures of the system now, there's a growing movement to change the structure. For example, there is an alternative schools movement to have smaller schools.
Right.
There's a movement towards choice, that is the charter school movement. The state legislature approved 100 charter schools, and the mayor has even talked about having a voucher system. What's your reaction to all of these programs?
Well, we have been, the United Federation of Teachers have been in favor of public school choice for as long as I can remember. When I first became president, I kept saying, and I still say, I want to have a system where every single school is one where parents want to send their children. So my underlying philosophy is to try and give choice to parents, but within a public school framework. And what I am very concerned about is, just like during the past administrations, when there were budget cuts, and all of a sudden the school systems got a disproportionate amount of budget cuts, and scores fell at that same time. Disproportionate budget cuts, scores fell, special ed enrollment spiked. I don't want to take government off the hook from its responsibility to provide a decent public education to every child. And the vouchers, unlike charters and unlike public school choice, what vouchers do is it says government is off the hook, and that is what is absolutely wrong with the voucher movement.
So you're opposed to vouchers?
Absolutely opposed to vouchers.
Okay.
Not
about
that
charter schools?
Charters we are open to, and we are working with the charter school, with charter schools. We have 82 charter-like schools in our city right now. We've been working with the small schools, the small high schools. We actually helped start incubating and starting many of the smaller high schools, but there's a difference and a big line between that is within a public school framework and that which is outside. Not to say that the private schools and the parochial schools in this city don't do a terrific job, because they do, and there's a lot of things that we can learn from them. The discipline that you see in the private schools, I would like to see in every single public school.
Sure.
The class size, lower class sizes in every single private and parochial school right now, I would like to see that in the public schools. The difference is this. The government has an obligation, I believe, to make sure that every single public school is a decent public school for the parents who send their children there. And I don't want to see the government being able to weasel out of that obligation. And the vouchers are about that.
Okay. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Thanks for being here.
You're welcome.
You can reach us by email at our website, www.cunytv.cuny.edu, to let us know what you think, or write to us at CUNY TV, 25 West 43rd Street, Suite 1220, New York, New York, 10036.